Hello again, team. It's Jess or JashiiCorrin, and welcome back for another plan with me. In today's video, I'm setting up a level 10 life page. Now, if you don't know what this comes from the concept from author Hal Elrod in his book The Miracle Morning, where he talked about people wanting to live their best lives in all areas, or their level 10 lives. But to strive towards this, you really need to start with an honest assessment of where you're at currently. In short, for each of the areas in your life, you give yourself a score out of 10, with 10 being the highest or best level. I've been doing level 10 life check-ins for a few years now, mainly just as a way to gauge how I feel I'm tracking in each of my different goal areas. For this layout, I've given myself 10 categories, which are related to my goals, and for each of these there's space to write down some notes, record my score out of 10, and then also write down how that score has changed since last time I scored myself. At the bottom, I'm also putting in a space to identify the things that I want to focus on for the rest of the year, and the things I feel I should focus on. In terms of timing, this spread took about 14 minutes to set up from first touch of the pen to final erasings, but as always, this doesn't include the penciling in, and it also doesn't include the filling in, which took a bit longer. In terms of the questions that were left on last week's plan with me, our first one comes from Jennifer, who asked, cleaning trackers? What are those? How did the at-home pedicures go? I don't even know why I tricked myself into thinking I'm going to use a cleaning tracker. I really love the way it looks. I'm really hoping that my October one gets filled in. Anyway, the at-home pedicures, I am so sad to report that we completely forgot about them. So I'm really hoping that we get to do them this weekend, fingers crossed. I've put it on my October self-care bucket list, so hopefully. Kellen asked, I know you've been working your way out towards reading more books this year, and I was wondering if you'd ever done any reading or books read tracker in your Bujo, or if you have any ideas on how to make interesting ones in the future. I think that's a really cute video idea to start with, so I'm totally going to do one of those for you. Previously, when I've used books read trackers, they've gone not so great, just because with my reading, I'm so inconsistent. Like, this year I've read, 4 books? And that is a huge achievement for me. So those kind of typical book trackers you see where people have, like, the bookshelf with all of the little books and they colour them in when they're done, which are gorgeous and I totally love, don't really work for me because if I had one of those, it would be a very empty shelf with 3 books. Not the most aesthetic thing ever. But in terms of interesting reading or books read trackers, I will totally make a video on that. Our next question came from Tiffany, who asked, how do you decide on ideas you want to try? I always think about ideas and spreads, but can never get out of my head enough to put them to paper. This one's kind of a tricky question, but one of the things that I do like to consider when thinking about the spreads that I want to include is kind of, I guess you could say, what season of my life I'm in. Is it a busy season? Do I want something that's going to be easy to fill in? Is it a not so busy season? Do I want to try something that's a little bit more fun and decorative? One of the ways to kind of get out of my head so I don't and ah when I'm setting up a spread though, is to go in with the intention of copying inspiration. Of course, my finished product isn't going to look exactly the same as the inspiration I started with, but it's a good way to kind of just get the ball rolling, and then once I'm a bit more comfortable, I can add my own twist to things. Hopefully that makes sense. Wendy Bird asked, do you have any ideas for single-page weeklies? I'm a big fan of single-page weeklies, honestly, and I have done a couple of videos about them. Whether that be more like a compilation kind of video or just one of my old school regular weekly plan with me's where I actually set up weekly spreads. To help you out though, I've put together a playlist of the videos that I have on those, so you can find a link to that in the description box below. Our next question came from Courtney, who asked, I'm in the market for a cheap, reliable step tracker. What are your recommendations for a good brand? So I use Fitbit and I've found success with that. But it's not necessarily the cheapest option out there. And by not necessarily, I mean it isn't. I think it kind of depends on what other functions you want other than just it being a steps tracker, because I know some of them have heart rate monitors, some of them have GPS kind of things, some of them are the Apple Watch, which means you can do a bunch of stuff on it. From a quick Google search, the internet seems to think that Let's Fit Fitness Tracker is the best budget tracker. They've said that the pedometer is relatively accurate, but the quality is not as high as, say, a Fitbit. What I could recommend though is if you go with an older model of anything, that does help save on cost. So maybe an older model Fitbit, which will be significantly cheaper than a newer model one. Maybe some of the other people watching can give you some ideas though, because that's all I've got. Aria asked, my question is, do you have any advice for filling out daily trackers, or is it just experiment and hope for the best? Well, for what it's worth, when I first started bullet journaling, it was very much that last method you're talking about, experimenting and hoping for the best. Me and habit trackers have had a love-hate relationship in our long history together. For pretty much the first year, I think it was, doing my habit tracker, they just wouldn't get filled in. I'd get maybe halfway, 2/3 of the way through the month and then just fall off with them. Sometimes I'd barely make it 1/3 of the way into the month and fall off. A couple of things that did help though was changing up the styling of my tracker, so finding a style that really worked for me, limiting the number of things that I was tracking because then I had less to fill in, it didn't feel like such a chore, making sure that the tracker that I was using was easy to fill in, I didn't have to do an elaborate doodle or something like that to fill my tracker in because that was very demotivating. Making it aesthetically pleasing, because at least for me, that was something that I needed to make sure I actually checked back in with it. And also just setting aside a time in my day to actually fill it in. Whether that be like putting a reminder on my phone to make sure it actually happened, or something like that. Even still, some months it works out great, some months it just doesn't happen. Our next question comes from Anita, who asked, what is your favourite nostalgic school supply? And also, have you seen the New Zealand washi tape at the warehouse? So second question first. Haven't been to the warehouse for quite a while, so haven't seen that washi tape, but when I'm next there, I will keep an eye out. And favourite nostalgic school supply would probably be those hardcover Warwick B5 notebooks, I think they are. Sorry, my bad, 2B5. I don't understand their coding system. I don't even think it was a B5 size. Okay, it might be, but eh. But those were the books that I took all of my notes in when I was doing my study, so those ones are probably the most nostalgic. Our next question came from Ali? I'm sorry, I'm not too sure. Please let me know how you're supposed to say that. But their question was, do you have a habit/mood tracker example that tracks mood, stress, energy, and productivity? Generally, I like to keep those 4 together to see how each of them affects one another. I've created and tried out 3 to 4 different kinds and have not really liked them due to it looking too cluttered. Any advice? That one's tricky, and I can see how that would end up looking cluttered because you are tracking a fair few things together. A couple of thoughts off the top of my head would be having them on separate trackers but on the same spread. That way they're still together but they're not sitting on top of one another. Another thing you could try would be doing weekly instead of monthly, and I'm not sure if you've already tried that, but having them just a little bit smaller or for a smaller snapshot of time might make them look a little bit less cluttered. It would also give you the opportunity to make them take up a little bit more space, which could be a little bit helpful in terms of the cluttered feeling of it. Those thoughts are mainly following the idea that you're using some kind of a line graph or something like that. You could always do it with a color coding kind of thing instead of a line graph, which again, I'm not sure if you've tried this, but then it would just essentially be 4 columns, so 1 for each of them, with some kind of a color scale ranking from worst to best in each category. Or instead of a color, you could use a pattern or something like that, which might make it look a little bit less cluttered. Something that would be really cool if we could figure out a way to do it would be having a line graph of sorts where instead of drawing the line straight onto your page, you draw it onto something transparent. That way you could see them individually if you wanted, but then also lay them one on top of the other to see how one affected the other, if that kind of makes sense. I'm not too sure how you'd achieve that though. You'd probably have to use like a plastic pocket or something like that, which you just cut to the size of the tracker and then maybe washi tape in or something. These are just some thoughts. You probably could do something similar with a Dutch door of some description. Maybe have a staggered Dutch door system so you can kind of see them individually or together. Hopefully those thoughts made sense and hopefully some of them were helpful. Though I would be interested to see or hear about the layouts you have tried. As always, thank you to our inquirers from last week. If you guys have any questions you want answered in next week's plan with me, please do leave them in the comments section below. For a look at that layout now though, you can see I've given myself a score out of 10 for each of the different categories. I've written in the change since last time I scored myself, and also written down what I want to focus on and what I feel I should focus on for the rest of the year. For each of the categories I also wrote down a few little thoughts, but I thought this was just a nice way to cap off my September spreads. My question for you guys though, which area of your life is going the best and which do you think needs the most attention? As you can see, for me it's my environment, so making sure that it is stress-free and peace-inducing. Thank you for watching, team. If you liked today's video, please do make sure to give it a big thumbs up, and if you wanted to see more from me, feel free to go check out one of my other videos. Until next time, bye!